Councilman Herndon.
Thank you, Mr. President. So first, I want to give some thanks, and one, I want to give thanks to the community. Whether you're a first time here, or many times here, or part of the RNO, not part of the RNO, live next door, live in Lowry, I appreciate you all coming out and sharing how your opinions about this. You probably learned a little bit more about alley vacations than you thought you were going to before this started. But I want to say that because we hear you, because when this process started 2 years ago, there was not a lot of concerns about it. And then right around the middle of 2017, because I was at that Greater Park Hill meeting where there were some serious concerns and frustrations. And I held a community meeting in October, and you came to that, and then Parks said, stop. We're going to pull back, and we're going to say, what does a community design park look like? So I want to thank the community for that, because you made that happen. So no matter which side of Fairfax this is going to go, this is going to be a park designed by the community. And so I want to applaud you for that, making sure that you're going to have a say in the design of the park. And the next group I want to thank is Parks. And, Scott, I applaud you for standing up here and taking the brunt, but you were a part of the team that said, you know what, we're not comfortable with how this has gone, so we're going to stop and rewind. And we can certainly look back and say, you should have done this differently, you should have done it better, but it takes something to say, you know what, we've did this wrong, so we're going to stop and make sure that this is a community design process. And you did that. And you stood in front and said that this will be a community park, designated, because the Greater Park Hill and their original piece back in November said it needs to be designated a park. That is going to happen, and it's going to be a park with community members at the table. So it's not going to be a plaza, because it's going to be designed by the community. And I don't think there's a community member in this dais or in these chambers that are going to allow a plaza to be built when they're at the table, so it's going to be a park. So I applaud Parks and Rec for doing that. I also want to applaud Ben in HM Capital, because he could have easily said, I'm not going to do this. And by him, and I actually believe because you lived in Park Hill, so you understand this community. You're not a developer that's just coming in trying to maximize and leave. As you said, highest and best is not always best for the community. I think you have demonstrated that you are here at the table and willing to meet, because you came to Greater Park Hill, you've come to my community meetings, you've come to the meetings that Steve Charbonneau, and I forgot to say to my colleagues, Steve Charbonneau facilitated my meeting as well as the one for Parks and Recs. You've been in all of that, and you've committed right here that you're going to work with the community when it comes to who is at the table when it comes to ensuring that this park will be inclusive for everyone. That's part of it is your role. The other part is our role, because this park's not going to be built tomorrow. So as a community, you have a commitment from your council person. What can we do to make sure that that is an inclusive park? And so my offer to Greater Park Hill or to any other community members, let's have that conversation. Because whether it's on the west or the east side, we need to have a conversation about gentrification. We need to have a conversation about some of the ills that are going through residents short and long term in this community that this council is working on diligently to try to mitigate. And we are doing that in several different facets, but let's have that community conversation about that. So those are my thanks for all the people that have been a part of this. I support the park on the east side, and I'm going to focus strictly on the park, because this is what the question is. You're going to get a community design park, east or west. You're going to get a community design park, east or west, that will be flanked by commercial, whether it be a beer garden to the north or a restaurant to the north and commercial to the south. So that's not going to change. So what are some differences between the two? We have the ability to build the park, community design park, faster, because we have demonstrated there is not a funding source on the west side. So we can build a community design park designed by the community, for a community that lacks park acreage. Just does. So let's do that as best as we can for the community. So I applaud all the areas, the people that have been a part of this. Let's continue to move forward. Let's continue to have these conversations, because if it's west or east, as Councilman Flynn, I applaud him for pointing this out, there should be the same concerns when it comes to inclusivity. So let's start to have those conversations to make sure that that does not happen. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman Herndon. Councilman Espinosa.
So you probably saw me up here sort of furiously writing things and stuff like that. I don't have my underwear in as big of a bunch as I did earlier and throughout this whole process, I always thought this was a 3-story development entitlement, and it's not. It's a 2-story, which really changes the math for me. That said, I don't blame the developer any more than I blame Target for asking for $4 million for the mall, developer asking for this transaction. But I do appreciate the willingness to sort of help with these other conversations and dialogue and be present, because those aren't your burdens to bear. But it is helpful when developers engage the community in that way, because those are burdens that are in communities. Unfortunately he left, but there were a lot of great comments, but I just wanted to tell Eric Pena when he was here, or Penn, that his comments in particular really resonated with me, but they sort of speak to all those things as well. So it's not lost. I mean, the basic premise is the money could have been given to the city to develop a park on our city-owned lands, but that is not directly beneficial to the developer. So that resolution, which would have resolved all of this debate, was never offered. And so that tells you something about what is the value. There's a number here, and we settled on $650. Even though Scott said the park that size is $750,000 to $1 million. So what that means is no. Despite what I heard tonight, the developer is not going to build this park. The city is going to build this park, but the developer is contributing significantly towards that end. But they could have. And that's what I'm going to get at. So what we have on both sides of the street is a rectangle, 125 by 125, a square, sorry. 125 feet by 125 feet. City owns one, developer owns the other. If a developer wanted to create a small open space, and I don't know if this totally is kosher with the MS2, and he wanted to do a quarter of that lot, that quarter is roughly 3,900 square feet. Doubled that for 2 stories is 7,813 square feet. And let's split the difference between $325 and $350 a square foot. Go 337. That's $2,632,981 of development potential that sits in that little quadrant that wouldn't be realized if an open space was provided within the development. So what instead we're doing is we're going to, within that development, so let's put it in the block, right? Sorry. But instead, what we're doing is we're giving it land to put that size of open space internal to that development. And then that entirety is developable across the street. There's real money there. So while I always welcome the idea that there was a win-win and a deal to be made here, the city needs to drive a harder bargain and not just give a bargain. We basically transferred the $50,000 deal that we got from Excel and passed that savings on to the developer, who is now poised on that development, on just that little on that portion, to make $2 or more for every dollar that is being given to the city in this transaction. That's what I mean by there was more latitude, there was more money, a harder bargain to drive, to actually maybe capture the full $750 or $1 million. Much was being made as this being a gift, and it is, but it's for the developer. Without more financial equity and a good neighbor agreement, without financial equity and good neighbor agreements, obligations to protect the surrounding residential or some meager affordable housing units included. We brokered this deal. Sadly, these are the failings of the administration. They're the ones negotiating this. Council does not negotiate this. This is This is the agencies that are in this, they're the ones presenting, they're the ones having this conversation on your behalf. Both sides, that's your tax dollars being squandered or being bolstered, however you choose. But if you look and you observe, history shows in this city the disproportionately the advantage goes to the developer, and this is no different. Again, I do not blame the developer for asking. I blame our negotiators for not challenging or pushing harder. So what I'm saying is this is not the deal I would negotiate. But it is the one, sadly, to some, that I can approve. Because this project will, but let's not mince words here. This project will expedite gentrification in this neighborhood, with or without the park. So this park has nothing to do with other forces that are going on there. But that's why we should have had those negotiations. Should have been part of the conversation. If we're not going for full dollar value, well, what else can we capture? What other hard commitments that could have been made as part of that agreement and not basically bantered about amongst council members who are struggling with the fact that, yeah, this is a ginormous giveaway, and these are tough conversations that the city should have been having. Because you guys were having them with us, but all we're doing is approving something. We're not negotiating it. And we could push back, but we're also not privy to these steps along the way. It's executive privilege. So, again, if I were in the room, we'd be having a different conversation. And you can tell what some of that would be. But our role is sort of perfunctory at this point. Is this a worthwhile, valid deal? Is it kosher in all sort of legal context? Yes. And now I worry because there is benefit here. So I'm not interested in throwing and scrapping everything that has been done and all the efforts that have been made. But man, my message to the administration is you need to drive a harder bargain. There's people, businesses being displaced with no place, no option to stay. And so I will be supporting this, but this is a tough deal in my book because the math, again, worked out really incredibly in the developer's favor at 3 stories, but that's not what we're dealing with, 2 stories. So it's actually far more closer to what it should be, numbers-wise, but it is still an imbalance. And my questions to the administration about what sort of appraisals were done, what sort of analysis was done to calculate the real value to the developer, were nil when I asked for a response on that. And so this was what was offered. It seemed like a good idea because it builds most of the park. But I think we could have gotten all of the park, or we could have gotten that commitment much earlier about what level of community involvement there would be. We could have advanced maybe the design of that park. So it was already sort of concurrently being built, being conceptualized, and that would actually benefit the developer because they could factor in some of the underground, some of the needs of that site. And maybe there would be some concessions by the city at that point that, in lieu of all of those dollars, build some of this infrastructure because you're going to double down. You're already doing the work in the adjacent area. But again, that's not this council's responsibility. That's the administration. And I'm willing to bet some of that's going to occur. My hope is, because there's only some more win-wins to occur here. So I've gone on long enough. I think you all understand where I stand. I will be supporting it, but I just wish we'd gotten more from the get-go. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Espinosa. Councilman Kashman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I share my colleague's concern about whether or not it was a great deal. I'm not as deep into the numbers as he is. I just see that Mr. Maxwell had a parcel worth $1.5 million. We're trading him another parcel worth $1.5 million. He's given us $650,000. He's going to get a park worth somewhere between that and $1 million bucks. So that's that reality. My main thoughts are along the lines of some of the things that Councilwoman Kinich shared. I think the issue of the design of the park is going to get settled to the neighborhood's satisfaction. That's what I think. I don't know that. I'm waiting next week to hear more specifics about how that process is going to unfold. But the thing that really does concern me is that we take enough time to look at the other issues, the cultural issues that have been talked about at length. And I don't know that that gets done in a week or 2 weeks. We've lost a year that discussion should have been unfolding in a more comprehensive manner. So I'll really be looking at how that's pronounced if this moves forward. It's just, as the expression goes, it's not fully baked. For me at this point, the park is not an issue. For me, with due respect to the neighbors, the side of the street is not an issue. It's the process that's concerning. And I get how that process gets shortchanged. I believe Mr. Gilmore 100%. He saw an opportunity to build a park quickly, and he jumped at it. And I've done similar things in my life. And all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, there's this other stuff that I should be considering. And while I understand it, one of the critical problems we face, and I think it was maybe Councilman Brooks that talked about the issue of the trust. We're fighting in everything we do here, trying to regain the trust of the public in their government. And so we need to really be extra attentive to holding public engagement as the highest value, so that that's in the top of our mind as we approach whatever we're doing here in the city. So, yeah, that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Kashman. Councilman Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I wanted to, coming from somebody who's fought for as much park acreage as possible in a park-starved district in Denver, and being able to turn that around, being able to create parks where nobody thought there were parks, and to build parks where we had every advantage and opportunity to do so. I could tell you that for as much as Mr. Gilmore is trying to put a lot of stuff on himself, we couldn't have done that without an aggressive, at least an aggressive mission to go and find park space wherever possible, especially in areas of town that are struggling, right? Especially of areas of town that don't have access to park space. And so I know that the intent there is to try to acquire parkland as much as possible. And there was a time in this city where this administration did not like pocket parks, and they were never interested in pocket parks. Now that's the only opportunity we have. I don't feel as confident, and this is not on any kind of personal attack, I don't feel as confident when we have to ask that we're accomplishing that mission, when we have to ask developers to do it for us. I mean, I really appreciate you coming to the table, and I appreciate the offer. But we have to be in a city, we have to have our priorities straight in the city with our budget to give parks the opportunity to have the upper hand. And so we're not, as a city, behind the 8 ball whenever somebody comes to us with some money, to be able to say, hey, okay, we should have our own fund dedicated to be able to guide our principles. And that's a budget issue. And that is going to be on the ballot as well, right? Whether or not as a citizenry, as a city, is that a value that we have? A healthy budget to be able to do this, not just for parks, but for our infrastructure, right? So I don't want to wage a war on our philosophy of parks or on the economy in our city and take it out on one side of the street or the other, right? There is a park that's going to happen, that's going to be built on this street. And I do understand what folks are saying at the microphone, folks that said, hey, we're tired of people calling the cops on us because we have Spanish music, because that happens to us, right? We're tired of people watching our every move in our parks and they don't let us be because maybe it's because of the color of my skin, maybe it's because the music I'm playing, maybe it's because the carne asada that's on the grill. I get that. I understand that. And for folks who are living in this neighborhood and want to see this park happen and don't understand it, take an opportunity to understand that. People in this country the cops are being called on us, especially Latinos, especially African Americans, just because we are who we are. We could be chilling in a park and that happens. Those are real stories. I don't question those stories because I know that happens. However, in my experience with parks, and also the other thing I want to address and what I heard at the microphone, and I get that there's some safety issues. In every neighborhood, we have issues where somebody's peddling some dope or there's some fights. I get that. That happens in my neighborhood too. That happens in our parks. We've had parks where that's been the case. Just because there's a park in your neighborhood does not mean safety is all of a sudden you're going to achieve safety. You achieve safety when people want to be in the park. You achieve safety when people want to be there and they want to have music and they want to be able to have a good time and they want to have their quinceañeras and they want to take pictures for prom and all that. That's when you achieve. When you activate a park, that's when you achieve it. So it's not necessarily that we have space for a park and we have parkland, but it's how we're going to program the park. What are we going to have in it? If all you have is a pretty little fountain and some trees and some ducks, that's not going to make an active park. If you're going to have swings, a gazebo for families, to have birthday parties, right? That's what's going to have, that's activating a park. So I can tell you by looking at the zoning and by looking at the uses, it really is not going to make a difference in one. I'm seeing that it's not really going to make a difference on one side or the other if they're just both flanked right there in the middle of a Main Street zone district. In a matter of years, it may look like a mirror image of the other side. And we've had all this argument and fighting for nothing. Unless you come to the table, you all come to the table, recognize that this is the dynamic in this neighborhood, what was said in these council chambers, and try to be able to create a park for everybody, right? And then also be aware of those social aspects of it. These chambers are definitely the chambers that should be hearing stories about the impact of gentrification in our city. Absolutely, we should be talking about that here. We should be talking about, the undertones of racism in our city. Absolutely. These aren't issues that we're not just pulling some card out. Nobody gave me a race card. We're not just pulling it out and using it wherever. It's happening. And we have to address it. And that means every single one of us. And everything we do, even in parks. And so I think I wanted to address that. But I also wanted to ask, and this is my ask of Parks and Rec, because of its location, because of the perception, whatever the sign, whoever whatever this park is called, it should say public park. So that there is no question whether this park is part of your development or part of the community. So there's no confusion whatsoever if it's, I don't know, Barack Obama Public Park. It could be Mickey Mouse Public Park. But however you name it public, so that people understand that they belong there, that it's their park. I have already kind of expressed what my suggestion would be. It would be to put it on a corner so people can see it, so you can access it from two sides, not just one, right? And that's all designed on your end. That's all up to you, but I definitely understand the angst. I understand the anxiety. But from somebody on the west side who has made it my everything to try to create parks that reflect who we are, that's it. Don't walk away. Be part of it. Demand to be at that table and make sure that park reflects North Park Hill for every ounce of every molecule, glory and culture it is, right? So, with that, I'm going to support it only because for those reasons. But yeah,
Thank you, Councilman Lopez. Councilman Brooks.
Hey, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for everybody who stayed around to nearly 10 o'clock to talk about a park in the neighborhood. But we're not just talking about a park. We're talking about something so much more. So thank you for those of you who drove, paying for parking, those of you who all came in here going through security and sitting in those hard seats. Really appreciate your passion for this city. And I think that's incredibly important. And if your passion dies tonight, depending on the vote, that's unfortunate because there's a lot of stuff going on in the neighborhood. I used to represent this neighborhood, and I'm on this street every week at House of Hair. Anybody know Pope? Mr. Pope is in there, so he has been. Man, I've been hearing about this deal for a year and a half. But let me just say something. So MLK's first neighborhood that he came to when he came to the city of Denver was Park Hill. And Park Hill is a historic neighborhood of always trying to figure out the issues around race and equity issues, not equality, equity. Understanding that folks are starting from a bias, understanding that folks are starting from a disadvantage in the community. And Park Hill has always been historic for having white allies who support that. And it's a powerful neighborhood. I got to say tonight, and it's because it's not my district and I just got a chance to sit back and listen to everybody. Tonight I'm just sad. Because I know who are friends in here, and I see you all on opposite sides. And that's not the vision of our neighborhood. And even though we have different opinions of what this is, we should never let this come to the point of dividing our friendships in our community, in our neighborhood. We will not allow what's going on federally to affect us on our street corner. This country is more divided than it's ever been. We're not going to let a park, we're not going to let gentrification, we're not going to let any of that stuff divide us. And so I just think it's important for me to say that at the outset, because that is at the crux of every conversation that I have, and it's at the crux of this issue here. So, I really appreciate the conversation. Obviously, the development issue, I was in the barbershop. I heard that it was 6 stories, redevelopment coming next door. All the way from folks who had been on the block for 40 years and was excited to see some change. And so there's some great debate and great arguments going on. But as the facts begin to come out, folks started to really talk about what they wanted to see, in the park. Who they wanted to see coming outside of those apartments, who they want to see coming outside the restaurants. and it's an inclusive community. I think the anger that people have been hearing, especially in the African American community, is that feeling like they're losing a sense of community. So I think, I appreciate Scott really talking about some of the missteps. The process was not right, and I appreciate you starting it over, Scott. And Scott, like I said, we've worked on many of issues and continue to work on issues. And I really believe that our parks can be that great equalizer in our community. And parks is not the number one issue in this community. I think everybody's seeing that. There's some undergirding issues that are going on. There's a school called Stedman and Hallett that are struggling right now, about to close, right? Like struggling. And so there's some big issues in our community. And I think it's important when we come to the conversation with these issues is that we start talking about them, we start discussing them. For me to support this, I'm very clear that I want a detailed list of the process. Gordon, we've worked on 100 processes together. You've been inclusive. For people to feel like they haven't been included, it troubles me. So a very detailed list of participants and what the process will look like by next week when we vote on this full up. Ben, there's Radion Development actually connects people with folks, small businesses who have been pushed out of the neighborhood. I'm going to give you that contact Radion. I'm going to give you that contact this week. And the person you should sit down with is Marcus Pope, who is in the neighborhood, because I just don't want to talk about the small business inclusion. I really want to give you tools to say, this is how we include small businesses, especially folks who've been pushed out of the community. As I look at the swap, I don't even want to call it a swap because it makes it sound really bad. As I look at the transaction here, dealing with the park, I'm going to say it again. There's huge trust issues, and we need to make things as transparent as possible. And I think that the city of Denver, when we interact with these transactions, we have to have an open and transparent process with the community so that they know. And I've talked to all of you all in Parks Department, talked to you in real estate, so that they know there is nothing going on behind closed doors, that this is for the benefit of the community. And I know that. I've talked in detail. I've talked about some of the issues, but the community doesn't feel that way. So we have a lot of work to do. But moving forward, I want to see those things to be completely supportive.
Thank you, Councilman Brooks. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. President. So these are neighborhoods, these are conversations that we're having in neighborhoods all across the city. It's not unique to your neighborhood. We've been having these conversations for, the last 8 years that I've been back here as we've been dealing with the I-70 project around some of the inequities that are happening to those communities. Interestingly, the city is beginning to have internal conversations about race and equity that is occurring. It's happening with our Denver Right process, which is very important because that's going to set the stage for our city moving forward for the next 20, 25 years. It's been at least that long since we revisited that blueprint document. And I think these are conversations we need to have on the front end of these projects, not on the back end, so that we address the concerns and the impact to communities on the front end and not wait until, folks have been displaced and they can no longer even have a voice at that table because they can't even afford to stay in some of our neighborhoods. And I know this was all about a park and where that park should be, and I appreciate the input that we have received in my office, phone calls, emails from folks on all sides of this issue. I appreciate you all sitting through a long night and, listening to the previous conversations that we've had here about other issues. But this has been very enlightening for me to see Mr. Maxwell's commitment to trying to work through this all, and sincerely appreciate your willingness to not only step back from the design and put money at the table, but really willing to roll up your sleeves and focus on some of these other social issues that have been the undercurrent of this entire conversation. And I'm pleased that Parks and Recreation is making a commitment to fund the gap, even though this is not a priority in the CIP. You heard the question about if this doesn't happen, what happens to the park and the commitment to have a park on this block? Well, the money wouldn't be there, but we're going to find the money to complete this park at this location because we have a $650,000, contribution towards it. So, I just based on what I had heard and seen, I sat through one community meeting in the neighborhood. I was leaning towards opposing this, but really having heard tonight's conversation, I am going to support this tonight just because I think this is a genuine opportunity to try to heal the wounds that have been caused as a result of what has been a divide. And I know there are people in this neighborhood who have worked together on so many other issues, and to be kind of split off over this one issue, hopefully this I'm not sure what's happening to the wall back there. Something's fallen off the wall. Anyway, I think this really is that opportunity to bring people back together, and appreciate Parks and Rec's, commitment to make sure that this is what the community wants in terms of the park that will be there. And so I will be supporting this tonight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. Councilman Kashman, you back up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, just so I could take up a few minutes of everybody's time. I know we enjoy those lovely benches. Councilman Flynn mentioned it early on. It's unacceptable that on an issue this important, that's been on top of people's minds for so long, that we have to vote on an exception to the rules because we don't have the contract till late on Friday. I'm also disappointed that, again, an issue that's been this present on everybody's mind, that we don't have a representative from community planning and development to answer basic questions. I appreciate the input from my colleague, Councilman Espinosa, but we've got neighbors here late and a whole lot of other people here late, and I think the administration could have done a better job in being prepared to bring this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Kashman. Seeing nobody else in line for comments, I'll just close with this. I want to say thank you to everyone for coming out here, for sitting here, for taking time to add your voice to the conversation. What I'm hearing tonight in here is the same thing that I hear every day in my district. There's so much change, so much that we feel we can't control happening in our city and in our country, that when something comes up where there is a chance to weigh in, we start having all of these really important conversations, even when they're not directly related to the thing that we get to vote on, because we are all, as a city, so hungry for that conversation and for solutions to the problems that we're talking about. And they're really important conversations, and we have to find ways as community to find more ways and better ways to have those conversations and find ways to take back some of that power and control. But looking at what we're voting on tonight, for me, this is about a park on the same block that has the same zoning flanking it on both sides. And nothing about our vote is going to change those things. So do we want one with $0 or do we want one with $650,000? And that's what we're tasked with voting. I know Scott, I know Gordon. I was in the trenches fighting with these guys for parks that we had no money for before I was on this council and in my former life. And I know that both of them are extremely passionate about this community and extremely passionate about delivering a great park for every neighborhood and for every person. I appreciate Scott stepping up in front of everybody and saying that he may have made some missteps along the way in the process. And I know, because I know Scott, that it wasn't because there was something else going on in the background or there was some backroom deal, but it's because he's so passionate about finding ways to deliver on these parks and on a park for everyone that when he sees something that's a possibility, he jumps all over it. And that's because we have a huge funding issue, as Councilman Lopez mentioned. We don't have the money to build these parks, to deliver these parks. We have parcels sitting right now today in my district that have sat vacant waiting for funding for decades. And there's no one offering $650,000 to build that park across the street or even $1 to do that. We need to fund our parks so that we don't have to scramble all over trying to deliver a park for a community that needs one. And we need to have the money to do right by every neighborhood and every kid and every person in the city. Right now, we don't have that, and so again, it brings us back to what are we voting on tonight? Do we want to park on this block and $650,000 to build it, or do we want a vacant parcel on this block with no money to build it, like I have so many of in my district right now? So tonight, my vote is for a park with $650,000 to build it. With that, Madam Secretary, roll call.
Herndon.
Aye.
Kashman. Kinich. Lopez.
Aye.
New. Ortega. Sussman. Black. Brooks. Espinosa. Flynn.
Aye.
Gilmore. Mr. President,
Aye. Madam Secretary, please close the voting and announce the results.
12 ayes, 1 abstention.
12 ayes, 1 abstention. Council Bill 855 has been ordered published. Monday, August 27th will be second reading or final consideration of Council Bill 855. Maggie Bolden, I know you're watching on Channel 8 right now. Thank you for the email. Thank you for the feedback. This is for you. I'm going to read this slower. On Monday, September 17th, 2018, Council will hold a required public hearing on Council Bill 820, changing the zoning classification for 3901 Alati Street in Gloveville, and a required public hearing on Council Bill 866, changing the zoning classification for 52 Monroe Street in Cherry Creek. Any protests against Council Bill 820 or 866 must be filed with the council offices no later than Monday, September 10th. Seeing no other business before this body, this meeting is adjourned.